Hello. Okay, so I was doing some research, history of science, and came across carbon. Carbon's been known about for a long time, supposedly. I'm going to get to that supposedly part in a while. So I thought I'd do a video on carbon, ancient uses of carbon and such, and it turned out to be somewhat boring. So what else can I do here? So I decided let's look at chemistry, ancient chemistry in total. And we're not really looking at chemistry so much as what we knew about the elements back then. And again, we have to consider, they were still doing the air, earth, water, fire, or water, wood, metal, fire, air, or depending on different systems throughout the world were used. So I can't really even go back so far as to say we're talking elements as we're talking, these are what we know today to be elements. They weren't considered elements back then. I'm putting that out there as a disclaimer because I don't want to confuse anyone. So, Wikipedia, font of all knowledge. If you look up discovery of chemical elements, it'll give you information. So phosphorus was the 13th one discovered, and that we actually have a date on. 1669, Hennig Brand isolated it. 1676, George Caspar Kirchmeier is the first person to actually give the name, or the first name in writing we have of it. And then sometime between, I didn't get an exact date, but it would have been based on his life, sometime between 1750 and 1775, Antoine Lavoisier recognized it as an element, as opposed to just a new thing. So when Brand found it, apparently it wasn't considered an element of it by itself. It was just a new discovery. It wasn't until almost 100 years later that Lavoisier said, no, this is an actual new element. Magnesium discovered first observed in 1755, isolated in 1808. That was actually a long time, about 5 or 6 elements after phosphorus. And I'm bringing these two up right now, even though they don't quite fit well what I'm doing, is because there were alchemical symbols for them. And most of what I'm going to talk about had an alchemical symbol. They were important enough that the scientists of the time eventually made symbols for them. And these two that weren't considered elements or weren't isolated as elements also had symbols, partly because they appeared in other. Now, some of the symbols might not have been for the element itself, like magnesium. Magnesia was known; it was a substance from which magnesium was isolated. So it's possible that the alchemical symbol for magnesium is actually the symbol for magnesia. Don't know for sure. That would be another study altogether. Interestingly enough, carbon, which got this started, I could find 1 or 2 charts which had an alchemical symbol for carbon on them, but most of those were like a giant C with a line through it or something like that. And so I'm thinking that's something like someone made up for more modern times. So the element which got me started down this path apparently didn't have a alchemical symbol in ancient times, even though it was somewhat recognized as being special. And even that I got to put quote marks around it. Like I said, carbon turned out to be boring. The story of carbon being boring might be more interesting than the carbon itself. So, one thing, back to this Wikipedia article, they have earliest use and oldest sample. And these are somewhat sketchy. Some of this is a matter of, we found samples of this, based The oldest sample would be, we found a statue which has this as the main constituent. And then earliest use is a little more sketchy. In a lot of the cases, earliest use and oldest sample are the same, so that's a little less sketchy, let's say. But let's go back in time. So, bismuth. This is an interesting one. So, we knew about bismuth since at least 1500 BC, at least. Now, the thing with bismuth is it was often confused with lead and or tin, and couldn't find any actual information on that. I'm assuming there's things like we found, a certain artifact, metal dishes, and 95% of the time these are made with tin, and 5% of the time they're made with bismuth. And so someone's thinking, okay, someone's confusing bismuth with tin. Or, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I never found an explanation of why they confused the two. I mean, they were similar, obviously, similar enough to be confused. But why we suspect that the ancients confused the two, we don't know. Or I couldn't find a good explanation of. So I'm assuming it's something to that effect where we find something which is commonly used as either tin or lead, and in a few samples we're finding it's got bismuth instead, and so we're just assuming that they confused the two. So it was around 1500s BC where we start to see, they've isolated bismuth, or they've started recognizing bismuth as being its own thing. However, we do find samples older than that using bismuth, apparently in substitution for lead or tin. And so again, they sort of assume that the ancients just confused the two, or confused bismuth with one of the other two, I should say. And I couldn't find any good examples of this. I just found this quick description. Now then, 3 of what I'm going to talk about are metalloids. 2 of them are non-metals. Metalloid is just a substance. It's not recognized as a metal, but it's got a lot of properties of metal. So we go back to the next one, around 300 BC. We find the first references to arsenic, which is a metalloid. Although we don't think of it as, you think arsenic, you don't think of it as a metal, and because technically it's not. It does have some metallic properties, so it's a metalloid. We think of it, it's interestingly enough, Zosimos was an Egyptian alchemist who writes about it. However, we have found other descriptions around 1500 BC that it was toxic. And I had to actually look that up separately. Wikipedia didn't mention anything about the toxic effects of arsenic, although other articles refer to it as the king of poisons, as it's been used a lot as a poison. So they did know about the toxic effects. Couldn't find a good reason why the ancient Egyptians were using it. Again, Wikipedia didn't mention anything about it being toxic, or at least not in the article I read. If you read the article on arsenic, it does mention it being toxic, but it doesn't say when it was discovered to be. We do know that Dioscorides, or not sure if I'm pronouncing that, he was a physician in the court of Nero, which would have been around 54 to 68 AD. He described it as a poison, so he at least knew it was a poison, described it as such. Possibly used it as such because Nero is known to have bumped up some of his political opposition. Lots of Romans did, so we got at least that far back we know it was poisonous, but again, supposedly there are other references as far back as 1500 BC talking about it being toxic. So, modern uses, it is still sometimes mixed with metals to make alloys. Other than that, it's considered toxic. Did a video earlier about cobalt, and one of the reasons why cobalt took so long to isolate was it's often mixed with arsenic, and people were dying when they tried to isolate cobalt. And so, yeah, it's something we avoid, but we still use from time to time. Okay, jumping back, platinum, 600 to 200 BC is both the earliest use and the earliest sample. So a lot of the samples were found in South American relics, a platinum gold mix. There was a box found in, let's see, Pharaoh, what's his guy's name? Shepenupet II, who died around 650 BC. There was a box found which had some the hieroglyphs on it were engraved with a gold platinum mix. So we knew that the Egyptians had it back then at least. But interestingly, apparently it was more used in South America, according to what I read. Can't find any lists of where all was used, so I can only go with what I read on this one. Zinc, used before 1000 BC. Mostly used mixed with other metals. Mercury, 1500 BC or previous, used as a pigment in Turkey and Egypt. Usually used as mercury sulfide. Was it considered an element? Because again, it was mixed with sulfur to make mercury sulfide. Another poison. I didn't check when we knew mercury was poisonous. But they're using it for coloring purposes. Didn't specifically say cosmetics, but that was one of the things we used to color. Could have been used for paint. I don't know. Next, this is the first. So one of our two non-metals, sulfur. So I'm going through this whole metal, non-metal thing because the metals make sense. We take something, we refine something, and we can melt it down and melt it down and melt it down, and they still don't recognize it as an element necessarily, but they do realize the more we try to purify this stuff, the more we get of just this stuff. It's something special about this stuff. And so, which isn't to say that it was recognized as an element, but it was recognized as special somehow. And this is where alchemists trying to understand stuff, they still believe in the 4 elements or 5 elements depending on your system, but we have all of these special things appearing which can't be broken down further. And so that's part of what the alchemists were trying to do, is can we break this stuff down further? And if we can, then can it be transmuted into gold? So we get to carbon and sulfur are 2 non-metals. And this is where it's like, well, we can't just melt these down and break them down and keep getting more gold or more silver or whatever. It's sulfur. It's mixed with stuff. We can purify it. We can try to purify it, and we of course with sulfur we start to get this strange smell, which is very unique. And so we can recognize it as being something special to some extent. But can we do it the same way we do a metal? And my answer to that is maybe. I mean, apparently they knew something special about sulfur. The Egyptians used it medically. So around 900 AD, when alchemy was picking up, there was a theory that all metals were made, was the sulfur-mercury theory of metals. All metals were composed of sulfur and mercury. So we're getting back into this elements and what is an element at the time. And there was this belief that sulfur and mercury, you can make any element, or any metal at least, out of sulfur and mercury. They failed at this because you can't. But, and why would they do this? Mercury is at room temperature a liquid, but at the same time it's obviously metallic. And sulfur is associated with volcanoes and with the earth and all that, so maybe they just saw it as such. I don't know. Speaking of which, I skipped over completely. During the Age of Alchemy, and what is meant by quote-unquote Age of Alchemy, I'm not sure. I'm assuming early Middle Ages, the way this is phrased, because again, we go back to the whole sulfur-mercury theory was around 900 AD. But yeah, so we don't know what is meant by the Age of Alchemy. But bismuth was sometimes called tectum argentii, or silver being made, because when they mined it, they assumed that silver was being made in the earth, and it just wasn't complete yet. So bismuth was silver which wasn't done yet, according to early alchemists at one point. Just wanted to skip back and get that. Okay. Antimony, another metalloid. This is a weird one. It's one of those things you all hear about in chemistry class, but you rarely hear about it, because it's not used that much. It's used to make a few alloys. It's not really that special other than that. However, we got, where is this? Pre-3000 BC, it was known about at least. It was used in medicine and cosmetics. And in Chaldea, so ancient Babylon, Sumeria, that region, there was what's supposed to be a fragment of a vase, a fragment of a vase. We're not sure what exactly it was. It was made of almost pure antimony. So it's a somewhat non-useful metal oven by itself, or metalloid oven by itself, because in the modern day we use it to make other alloys, but it's not really that popular. But at one point they made an almost pure, supposedly, base out of it. So that one, it sort of stands out, it's not the sort of thing you think of when you think of, ancient metals, but it stands out because we have this one example of it. Tin, round. So this is where we start to split. Earliest use, 3500 BC. Oldest sample, 2000 BC. Primarily mixed with copper to make bronze. This is around the beginning of the Bronze Age. Not much else to say about that. I know typically it was used to harden stuff. Silver and iron, both around, this is interesting, they are both earliest use 5000 BC, oldest sample 4000 BC, for both of those. And it's silver and iron, not going to say much more about those, because copper, 9000 BC, earliest use, 6000 BC, earliest sample. And again, it's just copper. Now we get to carbon, which started this whole thing. It's our second non-metal on the list, not even a metalloid. So, oldest use, 26,000 BC. No, that's wrong. 260,000 BC. This is a charcoal painting in Gavarnamung, Australia. That is what we're basing the date of 26 or 260,000 on. Oops. I'm gonna have to redo that. Other than that, it's like I got curious because people knew about carbon. There are references to it apparently. Now, like I said, metals, you melt them down, keep refining them. You obviously have something different. Carbon we get from burning organic matter, basically. And depending on what you're burning, it doesn't always look the same. I mean, some of it comes out black, some of it comes out grayish. So finding carbon to be a separate thing is questionable. But apparently they did recognize it as separate in ancient times, although I couldn't find a lot of detail on it. So primarily it was used to, when refining other metals, or when refining ores, copper, zinc, and tin mainly, to get the oxygen out. They would like burn it with carbon apparently. Again, didn't read a lot about the process on this, but somehow it deoxidized these ores, maybe used. Around 2500 BC, diamonds started to be used in China. That's like one of the earliest uses of diamonds being considered valuable. 1800 BC, we have what I call accidental steel. We found some tools. Obviously, accidental is a questionable thing. This is where things start to get a little vague. We found some tools. Obviously, they were stone-shaped tools with steel in them. The thing is, so cutting stone, you want a hard want a hard tool, and steel will do it. But we don't see mass manufacture of steel during this time, and we don't see weapons being made out of it. It's apparently we got just these tools made for cutting stone. Around, what's that date? 1300 BC, we start to see people started to realize, look, when we melt our iron, if there's a lot of residual ash in the furnace, the metal that comes out harder. So we started to get this more purposeful making of steel. This is why I said accidental for the other one, even though it wasn't really accidental, because the use for this steel was for something you want harder metal for. Is it just that it was harder to make, so they didn't make as much of it? Don't know. But we did start to make purposely make steel because we wanted a harder metal, because 1300 BC people started discovering, look, extra ash in the furnace makes the metal come out harder. It was still a difficult process. We still weren't using it in great quantity. It wasn't until like the 1800s, early 1800s, where the process for mass manufacturing steel made it more practical to mass manufacture it. And then gold. So 40,000 BC is the earliest use. Oldest sample 4600 BC. So this is where we're getting. This is sort of like out of step with carbon when it comes to the earliest use. But when it comes to like practical mention of it and practical use and day-to-day use, gold was used earlier. And this 40,000 date comes from, quote, small amounts of natural gold have been found in Spanish caves used during the late Paleolithic period. No further explanation of what they meant by natural gold. Was this just the wall of the cave, someone scraped it and there was some gold in there, in which case it's not really being used? Was this someone found some stone with gold in it and put it in a cave with some other stuff? You know, it's really unclear what is meant by natural use. So I'm a bit questionable on that one. This is why I say, you know, this division that Wikipedia uses on use is questionable. That's it. You know, gold and carbon were the oldest two on the list. Like I said, originally looking at carbon because I was just wondering what it was used for, because apparently they did know about it, but It's not a metal. It doesn't seem to have a use like other things. At least the arsenic I can understand. It's a poison. Sulfur I know was used for medical use and stuff like that, so it makes a little sense. Carbon, what were you doing with carbon? And apparently not much, other than trying to purify some ores. So that is it. Like I said, not as exciting as I thought it would be when I started reading it, but have a nice day.